going also. Okay, thank you. Another brave individual. Thank you. Okay, so again, just a sort of apologies that we're having this online share, but I think given that for whatever reason I wasn't able to give a couple of shiurim and I don't want us to fall far behind. Just a reminder, there will be share in Hashem, please God, this Tuesday also at the regular time, so we'll be back to regular program this Tuesday. So this is just an extra share. We were on many moons ago before the Bein Hazmanim, we began Kuf Base on the base, Perik Boneh, and we're not going to do Chazara on the Omud. I do though want to briefly do Chazara on the final little sugya we left off with, and then move on to the next sugya. So Omar Shmuel, HaMesaset is the HaEven Chayiv, etc. So that's the memra of Shmuel, that if one's Metzadid an Even positions an Even, one's Chayiv. And on that, the Gemara asks a kasha and so on. And again, eventually the Gemara says the principle, Elo tlosa binyone hava. There are three layers of building. Tata, the foundation layer, Metzia, which means all the middle layers, and Ilo, which means the top layer. Tata boi sududi v'afra. The lowest level needs positioning itself, fixing it, and earth. Metzia boy namatina, the middle level needs also cement. Eloi b'hanocha ba'alma, and the top level you're chayiv just by placing it. So Rashi and Tosfos learn that Shmuel's memra, in which Shmuel says that you're chayiv, means you're chayiv for Boneh. Why? Because you've done an act of building. That's how Rashi learns Omar Shmuel and Metzadid Even Chayiv. The Rambam, which I printed here in Perik Yud Halacha Yud Beis, says, sorry, Halacha Yud Ches, the second Rambam, HaMetzadid es HaEven b'yasoyit habinyan. If you position a stone in the foundation of a binyan, v'tikne b'yodoi, and you've positioned it, so you fixed it in its appropriate place. So the Rambam learns that Metzadid is Even, which the Gemara explains is the lowest level, which you position in the right position, is Chayev Mishum Makeh B'Patish. So the Rambam learns that Chiyuv is for Makeh B'Patish, not for Boneh. I think I printed the Rabbeinu Chananel. I did. Good. The Rabbeinu Chananel also says the same thing. Omer Shmuel Metzadid is Even Chayev Mishum Makeh B'Patish. In fact, it looks like in the Rabbeinu Chananel that he's not commenting. He's actually, that was the girsa he had in the Gemara. Because it's before he gives the explanation. He says Perish, and then he gives the explanation. So it looks like Rabbeinu Chananel is learning, or had that text in the Gemara, that the chiyuv of being Metzadid and Even, positioning a stone on the ground so that it can act as the foundation layer, is Makeh B'Patish rather than Boneh. Now, what are we meant to make of this? Why would it be Makeh B'Patish, not Boneh? So the Meiri, which I printed, said that the reason it's Boneh is because it's the Gemar Ha'inyan for that Even. So even though the wall isn't finished, it's just a foundation stone. That stone has finished it's been finished, it's completed its mission. I've done everything I need to do to the stone for the stone to now be fit for purpose. What's the purpose of the stone? To be the foundation layer of the wall. And by positioning it with care in the ground so that it's stable, and I sound like I know what I'm talking about, but I know nothing about building. But based on the Gemara, by positioning the stone with care on the ground so that it's firmly ensconced on the ground, that is Makeh B'Patish. That's what the Meiri explains. Now, the same Rambam that says that the foundation stone put in position is Makeh B'Patish, also in Halacha Yud Beis says that when you put the upper layers on, you're chayiv mishum Boneh. So we have two questions. Why with the upper layers are you chayiv mishum Boneh and not Makeh B'Patish? And why with the lower layers are you chayiv mishum Makeh B'Patish and not Boneh? Now, the answer to that question is that since you're chayiv mishum Boneh for the upper layers, so Memenu, you're not chayiv mishum Makeh B'Patish. We will look at this in more detail probably on Tuesday or even the year after that. But one of the things we're going to have to deal with is, why isn't every melacha also Makeh B'Patish? So when I bake a bread, besides it being bishul or afiyah, because I've baked the bread, I've also completed a loaf of bread. So why is that not makeh patish? When I build a wall, besides building the wall, I've also made a wall. Why is that not makeh patish? When I finish weaving a garment, when I write the last letter in a book, why is that kosev? Why is that orig? Why isn't that also makeh patish? So we'll have to deal with that. But whatever exactly the answer is, certainly la halacha, however exactly we explain it, when something is another melachot, it's not makeh patish. If it's kosev, it's not makeh patish. If it's boneh, it's not makeh patish, for whatever formulation we have. So the top layer of the wall is not makeh patish. Why? Because it's boneh. It's a different melachot. It's the melachot boneh. As soon as you have something being another melacha, that becomes the more significant outcome, and that becomes the melacha, even though we'll need to fine-tune that svara a little bit. I think we also spoke about it once upon a time. We did learn makeh patish previously on Ayin Gimel Ayin Daled when we learnt, that series of melachas that when you build a basket, you're chayiv 11, and when you bake an oven, you're chayiv all those series. So I think we already spoke about this issue of why isn't every melacha also makeh patish. We'll do chazara now because we're again revisiting the sugya. But for the purpose of our discussion, there is some explanation that needs exact formulation. But either way, the melachah is boneh, not makeh patish when you do the top layer. However, let's ask the question the other way around. Why, when I build the foundation layer, is it makeh patish, not boneh? And it appears the answer to the question is that, according to the Rambam at least, and the Rabbeinu Chananel at least, building boneh is only when things are locked together, or fixed together, or glued together, or bound together. And therefore, the upper brick layers, which are fixed with with cement, is melachos boneh. The lowest layer, which in the Rambam's understanding of the Gemara is merely placed on the ground, albeit with care and precision, and has to sit well on the ground to provide a good foundation layer. That layer is not boneh, because boneh means joining pieces together. Boneh doesn't mean placing pieces on top of each other. Boneh means joining pieces together, attaching pieces together. And this was the reason why I wanted to do chazara, even though we touched on this sugya last zaman. I don't think I understood this properly at the end of last zaman and brought out this point, and therefore I wanted to revisit this, because this is a major yesod in melachos boneh. The Rambam, at least, is of the opinion, I'll come to in a second, Adam. The Rambam, at least, is of the opinion, seemingly, that merely putting pieces on top of each other, albeit in a way that allows them to function together. So what is melachos boneh? So we had a working definition of compiling pieces together to form a functional whole, or something like that. However, the Rambam is of the view that it's not enough that pieces work together or sit together. They have to be attached together in order to be melachos boneh. That's the first Torah I wanted to say on the Rambam. There's more to say to sufficiently understand the Rambam, but Adam, you wanted to ask something, so I'll pause for a moment and then we'll carry on.
Yeah, my question was, boneh was a number of things. It was also smoothing the ground. It was also things. So why couldn't you argue that with the stone, which you're placing in place, when I think Rashi does comment on it being sort of some are leveling the ground in some sense, why can you say it's a form of boneh through that?
Okay, so we aren't going to have to eventually, before the end of the sugya, get back to the question that we asked right at the beginning of the sugya, that boneh is lots and lots of things, and we're not quite sure how they work together. And actually, even in today's share, hopefully, or certain Tuesday's share, I'm going to make some progression in that area, and hopefully get a little bit clearer. But at the moment now, my answer to you would be, you could argue what you're arguing, but the Rambam disagrees, meaning there clearly is some achievement of structural functionality in merely resting a stone with care on the ground, because it provides a good foundation. Nonetheless, the Rambam holds that that's not enough for boneh. At least boneh, which is attaching pieces, that type of boneh. There's other types of boneh. There's boneh which is making a hole in a little shulchan. But the boneh which is about attaching pieces, the Rambam's view is they have to be joined together, not just function together. That's what we hear in the Rambam. I'm not almost up to the higher order questions. I'm still on lower order questions, which is I'm just trying to hear the words of the Rambam. And this is what I've heard in the Rambam, that, and by the way, I say me, but this is the Mefarshim in the Rambam pointing this out. It's not my own Kaddish. That the Rambam evidently is of the view that pieces have to be joined together, attached together to be melachos boneh. It's not enough for them merely to be working together or sitting together to be melachos boneh. That's the view of the Rambam. Now, the Rambam carries on. Now, if this is true, we have a problem with the continuation of the Gemara, because the Gemara says that Ilah, the top level, only needs Hanacha Ba'alma. Now, that's a flat-out contradiction to what we just said. Again, notice the words of the Gemara, Eloi Ba'anacha Ba'alma. The top level of stones only needs Hanacha, just to be placed there. Why? I guess because the top level of stones don't have other stones on top of them, and therefore they don't have to be as firmly attached, or whatever, something like that. So, how does the Rambam, if the Rambam indeed holds that things have to be glued together, bound together, attached together to be melachos boneh, how does he learn that? And the Rambam answers the question, because the Rambam understands the Gemara completely differently. Look at the words of the Rambam. The Rambam says, "Uvenatvach elyon." This is the second line of Rambam, the Perik Gil Halacha base in the handout sheet. This is the Rambam. Haboneh kol shechayev. Hamasha b'nei akaka b'ayis etzadrik chayev. Echon losan as Evan, echon losan as tit, and losan as tit chayev. It's the person who puts the glue that's chayev. Uvenatvach elyon. This is the Rambam's quote of the Gemara of the top layer. Natvach elyon means the top layer of bricks. Afilu heles Evan v'nich al gabi tit chayev. Even if all you did was lift up the stone and put it on top of the cement, you're chayev. Because there is no other cement to attach to it, because it is the top level. So the Rambam learns that the chiddush of the Gemara is that the middle levels you haven't done the melachos boneh unless you put a layer of cement on top of the bricks, because the brick is only fit for construction purposes if it's got cement on top so that you can attach another layer to it. However, the chiddush of the top layer, when the Gemara says "Hanocha ba'alma," that's enough. It means Hanocha ba'alma on top of the lower level of tit, because since it's the top layer, and I'm not planning to build any more layers on top of it, that's the end of the melacha, merely placing it. So the Rambam, consistent with his view, says that you are chayav with the top layer b'hanocha ba'alma only when there's tit underneath it, when there's cement on it, because the Rambam learns that melachos boneh is only when you attach things together. How can you be chayav for the top layer by merely placing it? The answer is placing it on top of cement, because the layer below it has cement. That's what the Gemara means. All it's saying is the top layer doesn't need another layer of cement on top of it, because it's the top layer. All you need to do is you place it on what? On the lower layer of tit, which is there on top of the middle layer's brickwork. So the Rambam is very clear, l'shitosoi. The Rambam learns this chiddush, which the Achronim points out, that melachos boneh is only attaching things. There may be other types of boneh, like making holes in building and smoothing karkan, like Adam pointed out, but this form of boneh, which is joining pieces together, it has to be joining the pieces, attaching the pieces together. If you merely position them, that is insufficient, and therefore the Rambam learns that the bottom layer, which is merely rested on the ground, is melachos makeh b'patish, and the top layer, the Rambam learns, is sitting on the cement of the lower layer, and that's melachos boneh. Now, the Meiri seems to be taking a somewhat middle stance, because on the one hand, the Meiri learns, like the Rambam, that you're chayiv mishum makeh b'patish. That's how it begins. Let's have a look at the first line of the Meiri. HaMesaset is HaEven not to know mishum Yeshiva b'karkois yisoid. You place it on the foundation ground level, b'makom haroilon, in appropriate position, chayiv mishum makeh b'patish. Why? You position it, mechina, and you prepare it, and mishiva b'karka, and you seat it on the ground. To be fixed there. That's the Meiri you quoted. Even if you didn't put cement there, etc. That's enough to make it melachos makeh b'patish. Now, that's how he learns, like the Rambam, the lowest level. The top level, look how he says. Then this is the fifth line of the Meiri, the second word in. Or bebinyan ha'elyon, and with the top level, when the kosel is finished, with the placing of the stone alone, you're chayav, af below it, even without cement. So was their practice to make a row of stones, heavy stones, on the surface of the wall, hanocha ba'alma below it. A placement by itself without cement. So appears to me from the view of the Gedolei Rabbanim, which is probably referring to the Rambam. So the Meiri learnt like the Rambam all the way through, and yet seems to be saying that the top layer doesn't need any cement at all. Now, the only way I have of explaining it is that he points out that the top layer is large stones, and it seems the Meiri is agreeing with the Rambam that merely placing things together is insufficient for the malacha. You need to attach them. And nonetheless, he seems to say that if it's very large and heavy, then that's a type of attachment, right? Because a very large, heavy stone that's placed on something which is immovable, that's a type of attachment. So I don't really know exactly what to make of this, other than the view of the Rambam is that placing alone is not the malacha of Boneh. It may be makabatish, maybe not, depends on the setup, but it's not Boneh. Boneh means attaching components together. The Meiri seems to go with the pathway of the Rambam, and nonetheless seems to say that if something is very heavy, then it is Boneh, even without a glue or cement, because it's attached through weight alone. So there has to be something binding it together. Again, I don't know much about building work, but I'm picturing, sometimes when you go in the countryside, you see I've literally seen these things. You see stones that are piled on top of each other, and you see what the Meiri is describing, this top layer of stones that's different to all the other stones, that slabs, you can see it. So that's something like that is what I'm picturing. And it seems the Meiri is saying the point of Boneh is that something has to be firmly linked. And there are two ways of firmly linking something. If they are small stones, then you need tits, you need the cement. And if it's the large layer, which is the dimul se'elia in the top layer of the wall, then since they're heavy, it's not just a small stone, it's like a slab, then it would even be enough if it's merely placed there, because that is also a type of attachment. That's my attempt to understand the Rambam and the Rabbeinu Chananel and the Meiri on the Sugya. For the purposes of our discussion, all I really wanted to bring out was this one Yesod or Chiddush, that even though the Melacha of Boneh is joining pieces together, according to the Rambam at least, that doesn't mean merely placing pieces together in a way that they can function together. It means that placing pieces together in a way that they are attached together. That's my best attempt at gleaning whatever nuggets of information we can out of this sugya. I'll pause for a moment because we're about to move on. Any questions or thoughts of that? Is that okay? Okay. So, Rabbizobin, we move on to the hemshech of the Gemara. And this is HaMesaset HaEven Meshumai Mechayev Ravam Meshumpoina Shmulom Meshumaka Patish. So this is quite a complicated sugya, and what I wanted to do today was that there's really two pieces of analysis we need to do. There's in a sense a double machlokas going on over here. Part one of the sugya, there's three cases first of all, just to summarize the sugya. There's three cases. There's Masechet, which is the case of our Mishnah, which is you chisel the stone. And there, Rav and Shmuel argue if you're chayiv because of Boneh or chayiv makav patish. Then there's Nekev Belul Shel Golim, and again, Rav says Boneh and Shmuel says makav patish. And then there's Ayol Shufsa B'Kfina Tomorrow, where you stick the handle into the axe head and you pin it in place, which again, Rav says chayiv mishum Boneh and Shmuel says you're chayiv mishum makav patish. So there's a double, in a sense, a type of double machlokas going on. Rav holds you're chayiv mishum Boneh, perhaps not makav patish, and Shmuel says you're chayiv mishum makav patish, perhaps not Boneh. So we need to analyze both halves of the machlokas. And is it even true? Maybe Rav says you're also chayiv mishum Boneh, or you're also chayiv mishum makav patish. Maybe they're adding chiyuv. So there's a lot of sort of mess and a lot that's unclear in the sugya. We're only going to get through this if we can sort of manage our confusion in a workable way. So all I'm going to do today is deal with part one of the question, which is why is it that they are arguing in all these three cases, in which Rav says it's Boneh and Shmuel says it's not Boneh. So we're going to push aside makav patish and what Rav holds about makav patish and all the other confusion. All we're going to do is try and look at these three cases and understand what they are arguing about. Why in each of the three does Rav say mishum Boneh and Shmuel say no, it's not Boneh? That's our limited capacity question for today. The next year we'll try and widen discussion and ask how are the two interacting and what's Shmuel's view about makav patish and what would Rav say about all of that. All of that is stage two. But for today, we're taking a modest aim, which is why does Shmuel hold that none of these three are Boneh, and why does Rav think that all three are Boneh? The second thing that would be a nice outcome is this one machlokas or is this three machlokas? Is there consistency or a pattern between the three? Now, the Gemara addresses that because the Gemara makes a tzrichusa. Now, a tzrichusa is a very, very interesting sort of conceptual move in the Gemara. because the Gemara is indicating when it does so that all three are linked. In other words, you could have thought to extrapolate from one to the other, and the Tzrichasa points out that they are not identical. So each one has an extra chiddush. But when the Gemara says a tzrichasa, it tells us clearly these are not three separate arguments. If they're three separate arguments, you don't make a tzrichasa. If there's an argument between Sfardim and Ashkenazim, between Rabbi Yosef Kaira and the Ramah, about something in Hilchas Shabbos, something in Hilchas Brachas, and something in Hilchas Mominus, no one makes a tzrichasa. These are three arguments. They just happen to be arguing about three cases. If the Gemara thought that Rav and Shmuel were arguing about three separate things, all in Hilchas Boneh, but three separate concepts in Boneh, it wouldn't make a tzrichasa. I wouldn't say you need each of the three cases. So the Gemara is telling us that even though each of the three have some nuance of a chiddush, that means that you couldn't extrapolate, nonetheless, they are all on the same curve, they're all on the same line, they're all revolving around similar sort of issue. So we're going to have to try and understand what is the core issue going on in the sugya around which the machlokas Rav and Shmuel revolves. Does this make sense how we're laying out the plan of the sugya? That's our project for today. Now, there is an additional machlokas, which really a fourth machlokas, which is the top of Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph, and that's why when I printed the source, I sort of stressed to go through all of them, because the Gemara references the case of Kadeach Chor Al Manas Litkoya Yoseid, where you drill a hole in order to fix a peg into it, which again is a machlokas Rav and Shmuel, because again Rav says Boneh and Shmuel says Potter. Because in this case, there is no makah b'patish because you haven't yet put the peg inside, and therefore there's no makah b'patish, and therefore according to Shmuel you're potter. But again, the same machlokas. For our purposes, when we get to makah b'patish next year, we'll deal with the differences. But for now, again, I just want to remind you, we're being very strict on ourselves. All we're looking at is the question of the machlokas of Boneh, that half of the machlokas. So in four cases, Rav says Boneh, and Shmuel says no Boneh. So we now have a fourth case that does that. Don, yeah, you have to unmute yourself, but yeah.
Rabbi Zobin, but the fourth case of the Kodeach is not explicitly mentioned in the Gemara. Is it speculation that they're arguing on this? Because the first three are laid down and you read them through, and the fourth one is not mentioned. So
correct. So there's no memra or psak that issued from the mouth of Rav and Shmuel, but the Gemara that understood, we're trying to retrace the thinking of the Gemara. So the Gemara that had some understanding of the machlokes of Rav and Shmuel believed this was an appropriate extrapolation. And therefore, again, we have a fourth machlokas, and we have a fifth machlokas, which is Bezir Baramtsa Tapazula. I don't know exactly how to pronounce these Aramaic words. Which it seems it's a type of drilling where you drill with a screw or a nail such that the very nail that the very bit of the drill, as it were, the very thing that's drilling the hole is the nail that's going to stay in situ in the position. And the Gemara says, again, this is a machlokas, Rav and Shmuel, that Rav says it's Boneh, and in this case Shmuel says makah b'patish, but for the purposes of our discussion, Shmuel says it's not makah b'patish. So what is the machlokas in these five cases? So Baruch Hashem, we have Tosfos, and Tosfos says that the machlokas is, this is Tosfos Divrei Masel b'Shlomo on the top of Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph, and Tosfos says that the machlokas is binyan koldahu. That's the machlokas. Are you chayev for binyan koldahu or not? So exactly how to translate and define binyan koldahu is not clear, but binyan koldahu means a more trivial sort of building. We'll get a little bit more clarity in it, I hope, later, but not I can't promise a great deal of sort of definition. But either way, there is basically, Rav is more liberal in his definition of Boneh, or you could say stricter, because he says you're chayev for more. Rav is more inclusive, maybe is the better way of saying it. Rav considers even a relatively trivial act of Boneh to be the melachot of Boneh, and Shmuel has a tighter formulation and holds only a more choshev type of Boneh is a type of Boneh. So this is the direction of travel we're going to have to go in. On the one hand, as the Gemara points out, there's a tzrichasa. You need all three scenarios to be a case of argument, because they couldn't get away with only saying one, because we couldn't extrapolate, because there's a bit of a sliding scale of how significant an act of Boneh that each one is. On the other hand, there's a consistency in the machlokas, because there's a pattern in which Rav considers a more minor act of binyan to be an act of Boneh, and Shmuel considers you need a more major act of binyan to be a Boneh. By the way, every tzrichasa in the Gemara is built on an assumption that no Amora would issue the same psak twice. It's a remarkable mindset. I think I've mentioned this before in other sugyas. In Rav and Shmuel's rabbinic career, they argued 3 times over 3 different scenarios. Yeah? Now, you and I would say, because they were asked the same shaila 3 times or whatever it was, and maybe that happened in life. But when an Amora issued a sort of authoritative position, a memra, a psak halacha that was authoritative, he wouldn't issue the same psak 3 times in maybe, I don't know, a rabbinic career that spans 50 years of psak. When an Amora issued a psak, they should only issue it once. So if Rav and Shmuel argued in 3 cases, the Gemara understands that you can't extrapolate from one case to the other, or they wouldn't have issued a psak halacha in these 3 ways. And all 3 are overlapping. This isn't a Ramah and a Rabbi Yosef Kara in 3 different areas. Nonetheless, all 3 are needed because each one has it's different in a different way. But the common denominator of what we're trying to find is binyan koldahu. Each one has a bit of a strength and a weakness, so you can't extrapolate. But broadly speaking, Rav says even a relatively trivial building, binyan koldahu, is a binyan. And Shmuel says, no, you need more of a binyan choshev. That's what Tosfos teaches us. And therefore, in all these 3 cases, Rav says, binyan koldahu have a binyan, they're chayim mishum boneh, and Shmuel says, you're not chayim mishum boneh, you're chayim mishum makeh patish. Again, we'll get to makeh patish later. We're not learning the sugya of makeh patish.
Now, ask a question on that.
Yeah, sure, please do.
But the Mishnah is an obvious question, but the Mishnah says a boneh kol shehu chayav. So how does Shmuel say it has to be a significant? Does he just means the kol shu in the Mishnah means a significant kol shu? Is that what you argue?
Well, first it depends how you translate kol shu, because kol shu may be in quantity rather than quality. Because we saw the Gemara said that kol shu l'may chazia, on Rabbi Yirmiyah shekein oni chof, etc. So the way, at least the Gemara seems to learn the culture of the Mishnah, according to most readings, is that it's a point about quantity. There are melachos that have a shear, a gregeres, a kazayis, whatever it is. Boneh and various other melachos do not have a shear. They've got no measure, no halacha no Moshe Messina type shear. As long as there's some functional achievement, that's enough of a quantity. Rav and Shmuel are arguing, and in a minute you'll see more what I mean, but they're arguing over quality of binyan. What level of quality do you need? And that's where they're arguing about how significant a boneh do you need. That seems to be the pshat, at least according to that way of the Mishnah. Now, what I want to spend the last few minutes doing is just sharing the range of argument that's going on, and arguing that, at least according to Tosfos, we have to understand. I don't really know another Malach in the Shonim, by the way, so I'm stuck with Tosfos. Not a bad place to be stuck, Baruch Hashem Tosfos. But according to the thinking of Tosfos, how do we understand these various arguments? And I just want to share, in a sense, the breadth of what, in the end, all ends up being a machlokas about binyan koldahu. So, and I'll just throw at you an array of sources, and the next week we'll analyze them with a bit more care. So Rabbeinu Chananel, which I hope I printed on the source sheet on the handout. Yeah, I did print Rabbeinu Chananel, Baruch Hashem. So Rabbeinu Chananel on page 2 in the Geder Machlokas Rav and Shmuel. Yeah, in the 3rd paragraph, he says a Bahar Palig, and this is what they're arguing about. There's a bit of a Gersa mess in the Rach. You know, let's look at the last line of the Rach. I tried to print the variant Gersais because it's a bit of a hard Rabbeinu Chananel to read. But he says Vein Machnis Yedei Hakadoim, and so to someone who puts in the handle of the axe. Afal pi shekli, even though it's a keli, Rav Sova Yesh binyan b'kelim, or Shmuel Sova ein binyan b'kelim. Now, we spent a lot of the last Zaman discussing Yesh binyan b'kelim and ein binyan b'kelim. The Rabbeinu Chananel learns that this is the machlokas Rav and Shmuel. Rav says you're chayim mishum boneh because Yesh binyan b'kelim. Shmuel says you're potter because ein binyan b'kelim. Now, the same Rabbeinu Chananel who says that also knows the Gemara that makes a tzrichasa, meaning to say that all the 3 machlokasim are aligned with each other. And in the text of Rabbeinu Chananel, he says v'chein. Now, the first v'chein and v'chein nekev is a bit of a gersa mess, as it gets in brackets. It's not clear what the text said. But the second v'chein is v'chein machnis yidei hakadoim. Similarly, now lul shlog hana golim and Masechet HaEven has nothing to do with kelim. They're not kelim. These are building projects. Nonetheless, the Rabbeinu Chananel is happy to say v'chein, and in the same way as Rav and Shmuel argued over the other two scenarios, similarly they argue over putting a handle into an axe because they argue about yesh binim b'kedim or ein binim b'kedim. So what's the v'chein and how can the Gemara align them? So just borrowing the vocabulary of Tosfos, Rabbeinu Chananel doesn't quite say that vocabulary, but I think the answer is borrowing the vocabulary of Tosfos. There's a pattern over here. Rabbeinu Chananel is arguing that if you need a choshuv binyan, ein binyan b'kedim, if even a trivial binyan is enough, then yesh binyan b'kedim. In other words, kedim are less choshuv construction works than real estate. Even in English today, we might talk about building a computer or building a tractor, but building means primarily a building. So a binyan, a choshuv binyan, is a proper structure, mechubar karka, a proper construction, not a keli. Binyan b'kedim is a less choshuv binyan, and somehow therefore Rabbeinu Chananel is arguing that since the machlokas Rav and Shmuel is about yesh binyan b'kedim or ein binyan b'kedim, it's about a binyan koldehu, what level of boneh you need, that would also incorporate and encapsulate yesh binyan b'kedim and ein binyan b'kedim. That's seemingly what comes out from Rabbeinu Chananel. Now, the second machlokas I want to have a look at, which is in line with this, is oisenekev v'lul shel tarnagolim. So that's the second argument of them. How does that fit? So Tosfos says in Divrei Maschil lul shel tarnagolim at the bottom of Kuf Beis on the base, Shmuel Boneh. Shmuel doesn't consider it Boneh. Why not? Omeri mishum choshuv lahai Pesach osur achnes ulhotzi, because that Pesach isn't choshuv enough to be deemed lahachnis or lahotzi. So Shmuel says a Pesach is a very important construction project, no doubt about that. If you build a Pesach, of course you're chayiv mishum boneh. However, this Pesach isn't lahachnis or lahotzi. A Pesach means an opening, an entranceway. I don't really know in English how to translate it. That doesn't beg the question, because an entranceway isn't an exit way. It has to be both an entrance and an exit. A Pesach is a thoroughfare, throughway. And a throughway means dual direction. And therefore, Shmuel says it's not lahachnis lahotzi, and therefore it's not a Pesach. Now, why, according to Shmuel, is it not lahachnis lahotzi? Is it because it's only one or the other? He thinks it's only for avir to allow air in, or it's only allowed to allow light in, or something like that? Or does he not deem it lahachnis lahotzi because no one's walking through it? A real Pesach is a door where people go through, or proper significant things go through. This isn't a door, a pathway. It's just a hole. It's a little hole drilled into the wall. So, however we understand Shmuel, and we'll have to analyze this in the next shiur, and that's where we will start off with what is the din of Pesach lahachnis lahotzi. Again, I'm arguing it's the same machlokas. There is a halacha. A Pesach has to have a certain chashivas. How chashuv does it have to be? We need to define that. But part of that chashivas is it has to be lahachnis lahotzi. Shmuel says this isn't chashuv enough to be a Pesach, either because it's not lahachnis lahotzi, or it is lahachnis lahotzi but it's not chashuv enough lahachnis lahotzi. And Rav, who holds binyan kolder, who is enough for malacha, isn't worried about that. So all I really want to say for the conclusion, the closing words of today's shiur, is that even though each machlokas has its own topic. One is about yesh binyan b'kedim, at least according to Rabbeinu Chananel, maybe not according to everyone, and the other one is about the nature of a Pesach and how a Pesach is or isn't a building. Bal karchach, we also have to learn that there's a common thread through all of them, and therefore, even though the Gemara says each machlokas is independent and needed to be independently stated, on the other hand, there's a common thread that Tosfos teaches us through all of them, and that's really the tzuchos of the Gemara. They are all about what degree of chashivas you need in a binyan. Tuesday's shiur, Mi'etz Hashem, just to lay the groundwork for preparation, we'll be looking at this halacha of lul shel tarnagolim and looking at the halacha of Pesach lahachnis and lahotzi. I printed quite a difficult Chachma Shlomo and Marshal. Don't worry too much about that if you struggle with it, but we will touch on it. They're both going on this Tosfos that we just learned. There is a Gemara in Kuf Mem Vav Amud Aleph that you should have a look at, please. And there is a Rambam about lul, which is at the top of page 3, in which the Rambam 3 times brings the halacha of lul, Perek Yud, halacha Yud Aleph, Perek Yud, halacha Tezayin, Perek Kaf Gimel, halacha Aleph. And then there's a Lechem Mishnah about that, and that will be our focus on Tuesday's shiur, Mi'etz Hashem, the topic of lul shel tarnagolim and the topic of Pesach. But the hakdama to the shiur is that even though it's a standalone sugya of what is and isn't the din of Lul and what is and isn't the din of Pesach v'Achnus L'Hotzi, it's also part of a larger sugya, which is the topic of Binyan Kol Dehu, and that's what we're going to meet at Hashem learn on Tuesday, so that's setting the Mara Makomis for them. And then either Tuesday or the next year after that, we'll switch to the second topic, which is about Makom Patish. But again, I just want to caution you in the interest of our sanity, our collective sanity as a group, we need to control the sugya, otherwise it will spiral out of control. So all we're focusing now on is the Binyan part of the sugya. With the Rambam, we'll begin slipping into talking about Makom Patish, but before that point, just try and focus on Rav saying it is Boneh and Shmuel saying it's not Boneh. Then there'll be another sugya, which is Shmuel arguing that's Makom Patish. That only minutes Hashem will be to follow. Thank you so much, all of you, for your Mesiras Nefesh in joining us here out of hours. And in Mitzvah Hashem, we will resume on this Tuesday evening at our normal time. Thank you very much, Koch.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.